Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started at the top of the hour in a couple of minutes. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Today, we're going to be talking about addressing street harassment on the walk to school and making our streets a safe space for everyone. My name is Michelle Lieberman. I'm the Technical Assistance Manager at the Safe Routes to School National Partnership, and I will be your webinar moderator today. Before we get started, a little bit about the National Partnership. If you're not familiar with our organization, we're a national nonprofit working to advance safe walking and bicycling to and from schools, improving the health and well-being of kids of all races, income levels, and abilities, and fostering the creation of healthy communities for everyone. We do this through a number of means. We are working to improve the quality of life for kids, families, and communities. We're advancing policy change at the federal, state, regional, and local levels. We're catalyzing support for safe, healthy, active communities, and sharing our deep expertise through things like this webinar. A little bit of webinar housekeeping. On the left, you'll see the GoToWebinar viewer where you'll see the presentation. And on the right is the control panel. Here you can raise your hand, ask questions, and select the audio mode you'll use. Please note that the control panel will collapse automatically when it's not in use. So if you want to keep it open, you can click the View menu and uncheck Auto Hide Control Panel. There are two options for listening to us today, telephone or your computer or mic and speakers. Choose the audio selection in the audio section. If you have sound problems with one of them, try the other option. And if you're still having trouble with this, we'll do our best to field any issues. Just send us a chat message. So even though all of our participants are muted today, we really want to hear your input. You can use the questions box to ask speakers questions for the Q&A portion of the webinar, and we'll try to answer if there is time at the end. Also want to let you know that after viewing today's presentation, you might want to view it again or send the link to someone else. If that's the case, you can always go back to our website and view our webinars for free. If you go to saferoutespartnership.org, click on the Resources tab heading, and then click on the webinar in the list on the left-hand side of the page. All of our past webinars are stored here for your viewing pleasure, and they're great resources, so I urge you to visit this page. All right, and let's get on to our speakers. We have a really great group here today, and I'm really excited to hear them present. We're going to start with Emily May. Emily is the co-founder and executive director of Hollaback. She co-founded the organization at the age of 24 in 2005, started in New York City, and in 2010, she became its first full-time executive director. Under her leadership, the organization has scaled to over 50 cities in 25 countries. Launched Heart Mob, Hollaback's platform designed to support people being harassed online, and The People Supper, a collaboration designed to bring people together to repair the fissures in our relationships, heal, and bridge differences. Emily believes that through the power of storytelling, decentralized leadership, and deep empathy, we can disrupt cycles of hate and create a world where everyone has the right to feel safe and confident. After Emily, we're going to hear from Sydney and Nayla. Sydney is a licensed social worker living in Brooklyn, New York. She's employed with Steps to End Family Violence as a prevention coordinator. She works to prevent and support those impacted by intimate partner violence through counseling services, as well as educational trainings and workshops to students, teachers, and community members. She's also a freelance racial equity consultant who works with organizations to engage them in understanding and working actively to address and heal from racism and its impacts to the environment. Nayla is a sophomore at the Brooklyn School for Music and Theater and has been a rap peer leader since the summer of 2017. Her favorite subject in school is English, and she's committed to shifting her school culture. She joined the rap club and became a peer leader because she was eager to learn about the serious issues going on and wanted to make and support peers who were going through difficult situations. And then finally, we'll hear from Sarah Zimmerman. Sarah is the Program and Policy Director for the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. In this role, she works to support communities in obtaining resources and advice they need to increase physical activity, safe walking, and bicycling for children and adults. She oversees the work of the Program and Policy Department in providing high-quality assistance and advice to low-income communities and other communities of different sizes and in regions across the country. And with that, I will pass it over to Emily.
Great. Great. So my name is Emily. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Hollaback. And I'm just going to do a little background on understanding harassment and understanding street harassment in particular, and what it is, who it impacts, and some strategies that we've come up with to address it. I'm really grateful to be here, grateful that all of you are here, and grateful for some awesome co-panelists. So here we go. You may have heard of Hollaback, you may not have heard of Hollaback. We are a global people-powered movement to end harassment. And really what we're doing is leveraging the very spaces where harassment happens, from online to streets to the workplace, to have each other's backs and build a world where we can all be who we are, wherever we are. Part of how we do this is looking at stories. And certainly in this moment of Me Too, we're seeing in a very real and very tangible ways the impact that stories have on shaping our movements and the way that we think about these issues. Hollaback has been collecting stories since 2005. We've collected about 11,000 of them. And here is a map, and all of these pink dots, you'll see stories shared of harassment across the country. You'll also see these moments of bystander intervention. And bystander intervention is something that is very important and very near and dear to our hearts, because oftentimes when it comes to the streets, the systems in place that may protect you inside a school building or inside a workplace or at a college aren't at play. And so really who we have are each other to depend on. And so looking at how we can take care of each other in public space is really core to Hollaback's work, and training people to be able to tangibly do that, to avoid some of the pitfalls and to stay safe and ultimately reduce trauma for people who are harassed. Through our research with Cornell, we found that as little as a knowing glance can effectively reduce trauma for people harassed on the streets. And then another big component of our work is that we train young leaders around the world to be able to localize this movement to their own communities and to respond to what harassment looks like in their own communities, acknowledging that it's going to be different in different places. Certainly here in New York City, where it's incredibly dense and urban population, it's going to look different than it does in the hometown where my dad lives of Littleton, North Carolina, where public space is mostly defined by a Walmart parking lot. And so the solutions too are going to look different. And as much as Hollaback is based in sort of leveraging, the internet to be able to share these stories anonymously and to map them, we are also based in localizing that movement to local communities so that it can be responsive to local needs, and training leaders to be able to define both the problem and the solution for their own communities. And we are also all around the world, not just here in the US. So digging in, what is harassment? So, harassment's an interesting word in a lot of ways. Sometimes harassment is called bullying. Sometimes harassment is called hate violence. There's nuances to all of those words, but at its bias, right, we're talking about at its core, we're talking about something that's bias motivated and includes hate violence. And specifically, we're talking about sort of a day-to-day enacted and consistently reinforced power dynamic that reminds historically marginalized groups of our vulnerability to assault in public spaces. And in terms of who it's impacting, a lot of times street harassment is referred to as something that is sexist. It's typically thought of as a "hey baby" or "I want to bleep you and your bleep," right? All that kind of stuff. But it can take a lot of forms that aren't just sexist and aren't just about objectifying women. It can also be racist, xenophobic, religious-based, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, sizes, classes, ages. And I think it's important to remember too that, some of these identities are visible, some of these identities are not visible. And many of us are holding, many different identities. And so one of, I think my favorite quotes about this issue that I always keep top of mind is my friend Kimberly is saying, "You know what, Emily, when I'm harassed, I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, because I'm gay, or because I'm Latina." And oftentimes you won't, right? There's never like an explicit, or there's often not sort of an explicit nod to all of that stuff. But what we do know is that harassment is worse the more marginalized identities you have. And by worse, we mean it's more likely to happen and it's more likely to be extremely severe. And so when we talk about harassment, what kinds of things are we talking about? What kinds of behaviors are included here? It can be something like intimidating looks and staring. People certainly have talked about it in terms of feeling like somebody was undressing them with their eyes, or also talked about it in terms of particularly people of color, particularly Black and Latino folks, being followed through a store, right, by a store manager with the assumption that they're going to steal something in a way that, a white person, for example, may not be. Certainly comments about appearance, keeping in mind that those comments can be, nice bleep, etc., but they can also be really incredibly degrading or negative. And oftentimes we'll see a comment that might start as something that is relatively benign. When they are rejected, will escalate into something that's more negative, like, "Well, you were ugly anyway." Certainly vulgar gestures, whistling, making kissing noises is part of it. Following somebody, whether following them down the street or following them, racist, xenophobic, homophobic, sexist, transphobic slurs. Those are some of the most obvious stuff to identify, but keep in mind that those slurs are going to differ based on where you are in the country. For example, I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia. The slurs that people use in Richmond, Virginia, very different than the slurs that people use in New York City. We see a lot of public exposure and masturbation. Oftentimes with young folks, this is one of the most common and traumatizing things that they will witness. And being clear here that we're not talking about, folks just, masturbating on the street in their own little corner, not bothering anybody. We're talking about people doing this with the intent of intimidating others. Grabbing, touching, groping, and also defacing public spaces. We've seen a lot of playground equipment with swastikas on it, et cetera, within the past couple years. And that can create a culture where people feel unsafe going to school. Street harassment in the US, this was done in partnership with Cornell. First experience, certainly peaking around age 13 to 14 is pretty consistently what we see. About at least a third of people are starting to experience it, but keep in mind, at least half of people have experienced it by the time they're turning 13 and 14. And at Hollaback, we've received stories from girls as young as 7. And it's prevalent. We do see that young folks are disproportionately targeted by harassment. 50% of US women under the age of 40 have been groped or fondled within the past year, which is significant. And 77% of US women under 40 have been followed by a man or group of men within the past year. And what we see is, there are some significant impacts there. Over half of the respondents in this survey noted that they changed their clothing or refused to go to a social event, chose different transportation options, or felt distracted at work and school as a result of this harassment. And so it is authentically having an impact on our ability for our education system to work effectively. If you're getting harassed on the way to school, certainly we do see some people skipping school, but oftentimes we will see before that people coming to school but being distracted and unable to pay attention. We also, of course, see people moving homes, and it limits people's mobility overall. We, hear consistent reports of especially anxiety, but also, post-traumatic stress disorder when it comes to psychological and mental health. And that can include up to people becoming depressed and suicide and committing suicide in the example of Tyler Clemente and others. And of course, this creates fissures in our community and our ability to relate to one another, which is significant, right? The ability of young people to feel safe inside their community, to feel safe going to school, at their school, around their school, will not just impact their ability to learn, but will impact their ability to participate in civic life. At Hollaback, we encourage folks to share their story either on our site or on our free app, where they can document what they're going through. And we have a whole bystander intervention training that we strongly encourage, as well as these great infographics, which you'll see the front cover of here to the left, called Show Up, on how to do bystander intervention, that we're happy to get out to your local schools, if that is something that is helpful. So that is about it for me. In terms of bystander intervention, just a quick preview, we do have what we call the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. So it's 5 different tactics that you can take. One of them is direct, right? Directly intervening. 4 of them are indirect, which is really important for young folks in particular who may not feel comfortable directly intervening, or may not feel safe, or that they're going to be taken seriously if they're directly intervene. And that is about it for me. So thank you all so much, and I look forward to hearing the rest of this webinar.
Great, thank you. And we'll pass it over to Sydney.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Sydney Corridors. I'm a social worker and a program coordinator at STEPS to End Family Violence. So STEPS was founded by Sister Mary Nearney in 1986. And again, I'm just going to offer some background to STEPS and to Surratt, and then really speak to how it connects with our work with, again, sexual harassment and street harassment. So STEPS, again, was founded by Sister Mary Nearney in 1986 and is a multifaceted organization. We provide programs geared toward meeting the needs of adult, teen, and child survivors of intimate partner violence. And we do this in all the 5 boroughs of New York City. So we offer a variety of trauma-informed, anti-oppressive programming focused on the prevention of intimate partner violence. So we really work to advocate with and support the healing for survivors and children impacted by abusive partner behavior. We also train and educate with the intention. Excuse me, I work at a school, so we have the announcements going on. But we also work with the intention of really trying to offer some trainings and education to increase awareness of the epidemic of gender-based violence, and really serve as activists with our efforts designed to transform the rhetoric and institutions that sustain that sort of violence. So our programs, we really have a variety of programs in the New York area, including our community-based services program, our children's services team, our court-involved services team, and as well as our teen services program, which includes Girl Rise Lead and RAP. So I personally work for RAP, which stands for the Relationship Abuse Prevention Program. So we're a school-based program in schools across New York City. So RAP has three main components of our work. We're really split into intervention and prevention. And in terms of the intervention piece, we really are talking about individual, group, and crisis counseling. The prevention piece I'll go into a little bit deeper, but that's our workshop. So our workshops, we have a variety of types, but it really is our 3-series workshop curriculum. So we talk about teen relationship abuse, and it's kind of a 101, which is the first piece. And that's really talking about the dynamics of power and control and really what it looks like in practice, right? And offering that education in order to prevent. So as our young folks are more aware of what this may look like, they might be able to recognize some of the warning signs. Our second piece, which is most relevant to today, is talking about sexual violence. So we talk about sexual violence in general, what that may look like. And then we also are talking about sexual harassment and street harassment. So we really go in deep about some of those dynamics and how they connect to teen relationship abuse in terms of dynamics of power and control. That is often, it is a gendered issue, and at the same time, this impacts folks of all genders, and folks of all genders can kind of perpetrate or perpetuate this violence. So really trying to hold both in that, this is something that impacts all of us, and in what ways can we take ownership and be upstanders, or as Emily May mentioned, intervene as bystanders. So we talk about that, and then for the last part of our 3-series workshop, we talk about healthy relationships. So we talked about some of these heavier topics in the first 2 sections of our workshop, and then the last part is, well, now what do we do with this information? How can we have healthier relationships with each other and with folks in our community? So something else that we also talk about outside of our 3-series workshop is toxic masculinity, the man box, and really like what it means to be a man, and what messages society puts out and the media puts out that folks are receiving, folks of all genders are receiving and internalizing. And then we also really try to draw clear definitions between flirting and harassment, and the idea of a mutual wanted interaction versus an unwanted attention that's often about power and control and discomfort. So something else in terms of the intervention piece that I mentioned earlier is that we offer counseling services as well. So I, again, am a licensed social worker and offer individual, group, and crisis counseling. And the idea behind that is we're not just supporting students who are impacted by sexual violence or impacted by teen dating violence, but really we're supporting anyone who's looking to have a healthier relationship. So whether that's a healthier relationship with themselves, with their families, with folks at school, and the people in their community, because the idea is that in having healthier relationships, we're hopefully able to work to prevent some of those more unhealthy dynamics that can come up in terms of teen dating violence. Another part of our intervention piece is that with these workshops, our prevention piece is that with these workshops, we also offer them not only to our students, but to our school staff, to our community members, to the parents. And the idea is that we're really trying to engage our entire school community, that this isn't just something for students. While it is largely student-focused and really accessible to students, we really try to engage our community. And I'm offering this as a suggestion for ways for folks to be able to get involved in their school communities, that these things are happening all across the country and definitely all across New York City where we're based. And in what ways can we look for this and engage and connect with the different community organizations in your schools. So we also have our summer program, which is an intensive internship program where we hire students from our schools across the city and offer the opportunity to learn about teen dating violence, gender-based violence, and a variety of social justice topics. So often street violence and street harassment and sexual violence come up in that we're a program that talks about gender-based violence and all the different social justice issues and isms that really intersect in the ways in which they're impacted. So again, Emily May talked about how based on what marginalized identities folks hold, the ways that those compound to impact, that street harassment can impact them even more frequently, and it can look a variety of different ways. So that intersectionality is something that we really speak to a lot in our program, and something that we really center in terms of the workshops that we offer in the summer program. So while this summer program is led initially by the coordinators like myself, the peer leaders end up really taking ownership of the summer and end up putting on a conference at the end. So they put on this conference that is by students and for students across the city for them to be able to not only begin their roles as leaders in their communities and their schools, but also to engage other young folks in being leaders in their communities and in their schools. So again, we're really focusing on the on the upstander piece, or again, as referenced, the bystander intervention of in what ways can we take ownership of this and really work to shift culture in a way that's collaborative and community-centered and focused. And then again, the idea is that they're having this practice throughout the summer and having this training and the support, and they're going into their schools at the start of the new year so that they can be leaders in their school communities and change makers with all of this new knowledge so that they can shift culture and model upstanding. So I have Nayla here, and she's going to speak a bit about the peer leader experience from the summer and the school year, and also speak to her thoughts on street harassment.
Hi everyone, my name is Nayla, and I am a peer leader of the RAT, which stands for Relationship Abuse Prevention Program. I chose to join this program because I wanted to bring awareness to the problems occurring in society, and I wanted to help find solutions for those problems and be able to help myself and others. I personally asked some of the RAT members why they wanted to join this program and what they hope to gain out of it, and they as well wanted to put an end to harassment and wanted to be prepared if they ever get into a situation. We want to put an end in street harassment and be upstanders. Street harassment can happen in different ways, either physically or verbally, and it can be very effective. It can sometimes even ruin people's day, and sometimes people don't know your intentions when you unwantedly approach them in a certain way. From my experience of the summer program, I got to learn a lot, and I gained a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of ways that I know how to deal with street harassment and most of the social problems that occur in society.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Dana. So we think it's really important to empower the students and young folks, because this is something that's cultural and a part of our society, and we talk a lot about rape culture and consent culture as a goal that we're really striving towards, and something that we really try to normalize in terms of consent and mutual interactions. And so we really recognize that this is something that we need to incorporate at every level of society, and we really do want to start with the youth in terms of recognizing their impact, especially with social media. So we've been doing some more work with social media as well, and are hoping for that to really expand. But thank you, Nayla, for sharing your thoughts on that, and that's just a testament to some of the work that we're doing in the schools and over the summer. Some of the other work that we're doing is a lot of the school campaigns and community-wide campaigns, and it's something that I do want to speak to in terms of ways that, again, in which you all can get involved and engaged in your school communities. Because I think it can be tough and feel really siloed of that. There are the different sections of the communities, and we're doing this work and we're not sure who else is doing the work. And I think schools are a really nice and centralized point to get in contact of what's happening. And I think it's also encourages schools to be even more connected with the communities, because I think that's something that some schools really do, and some schools are maybe working to do that more so. So something that RAP does, and that we know that we hope that other organizations are doing as well, and definitely think that people can tap into that, are some school-wide campaigns and community-wide campaigns. So one of the things that we've talked about is sidewalk chalking, which I think feels really simple, but I think it could be really even relevant to the Safe Route family in terms of it being an outside, more street-focused initiative. And that can look like a variety of things. So that can be just putting out notices about stopping street harassment, but it can also be, what does it look like to be an upstander? What does it look like to, how are folks impacted by street harassment? Something else that we've done in terms of community engagement, which is not necessarily related to sidewalk chalking, but just speaking to again, engaging the community is that we've put up flyers of what street harassment looks like, ways to be an upstander, different tips or sentence starters and ideas for ways that folks can address it. And we put that up on local posts. We've asked different communities and business owners, like bodegas and corner stores, things that are really in the community in ways that are not necessarily criminalizing this, but it's taking accountability and it's asking the community to take accountability with us. So these are all different ideas that I think can be tried. Something else that we're working to do is, having different spirit days. So teal is the color of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So that's we can have different days that we're encouraging everyone in the school, all of the bus drivers, all of the parents walking there and guardians walking their children to school. So really engaging the full entire community in terms of wearing this teal to raise awareness and show our solidarity for this effort. We also honor Denim Day, which is talking about raising awareness for sexual assault and against victim blaming. So, encouraging folks to wear denim. We're trying to make almost a spirit week to encourage more students at our school to, maybe they're having pajama day one day and twin day another, and then there's denim day on April 25th. Another thing that we talk about is International Human Rights Day and recognizing that, it is a right for our humanity to be honored. So in what ways are we able to tie in these international movements and really connect them with what we're working to do on the ground as well. The National Day of Silence speaks to honoring the ways in which the queer community is often silenced, and this is a way of also talking again with that intersectionality of how folks within that community deal with a variety of different marginalizations and how street harassment contributes to that. There's also PSAs and awareness videos, which I'll speak to in a bit. But really different ways that we are putting out this message, trying to spread awareness, and also, in addition to spreading awareness, offering action-based solutions or supports on what can we actually do about this issue. Another thing that we've done is have young men's groups. Again, we are as well also a therapeutic agency and program, but this can look action-oriented and can also be therapeutic of really working to understand masculinity and toxic masculinity and what that looks like, and recognizing that this is, holding both of that this is an issue of gender-based violence, and it also is an issue that affects and impacts all folks of all genders. So how can we hold that and not place blame and also take accountability? And recognizing that this is something that we all must do together. A lot of times we've talked about in our work that a lot of times marginalized folks, it becomes their job or their role to undo their own marginalization. So in ways, can we engage young men and boys in this work in a way that is collaborative? So I do want to just move forward and talk about some more community-wide campaigns, which can speak to some of the things that we've done and also some ideas that maybe could be helpful in ways to engage and actually do this work. So something that we've done is had different fashion shows. So this has been at some of our schools that are offering, that can be for Denim Day. So a lot of it, you'll notice the next few slides are with denim. But just in general, different fashion shows. So this one first says, get angry and end rape culture. And the little wording on the note card is saying, the wording of get angry and end rape culture gives power to the individual who is fighting for consent culture. Power. We need to empower one another by educating others too. So that's really, this is a student's work at one of the high schools that we collaborate in, and again is speaking to education and empowerment, which is something that we really try to model and encourage as well. So another thing that someone did on this piece of denim that's also attached to a bag, the wording says, it is not consent if you make me afraid to say no. And we really talk about what clear active consent looks like and that it is retractable and really just all the different pieces of consent. And then the note card speaks to that this piece was inspired by the color of red and what it signifies. And they noted that red signifies love and can also signify hatred. So it really speaks to that duality of what, when we talk about flirting versus sexual harassment, and that it can feel romantic, and also what pieces of the sexual harassment aspect are contributing to rape culture and are about power and control and are harmful. And then the next piece, this one says, my clothes are not my consent. And the note card says, many people have the single story that women and men's clothing are a call for rape and sexual assault from what you're wearing, which is not right. My message on my jacket gives the idea of consent culture, a culture in which asking for consent is normalized. The flowers represent how we are growing as a society by educating one another and not being censored by rape culture. So again, this is all student work, and it's offering just some examples of some of the advocacy that we've done with our students. So this is the video that I spoke to earlier, one of the PSAs that we've recently created and that will actually be launching and presenting soon. But it's a masculinity video, and it's talking about toxic masculinity and what masculinity can look like. So these are some of our peer leaders that are featured here with our wonderful coordinator, Colleen, and then Tony Porter, who with his colleague, Ted Bunch, are the co-founders of the program A Call to Men, which really talks about what's men's role in street harassment, sexual violence, and sexual assault, and in really undoing toxic masculinity. Something else that we've done is really, and I think this is a great example of that, is anti-street harassment rally. So this isn't something that we've put on. This was something that was already happening in the community, and one of our coordinators engaged their students to be able to come. And what would it look like for all of us in the different facets doing this work are able to come together and march together as opposed to in our different silos. So again, ways that we can get engaged with the schools, or that you all maybe can reach out to your schools and invite folks for field trips to come together. So ways that we can either join things that are already happening or kind of take that initiative and lead those charges. So again, this is at one of the anti-street harassment rallies with some peer leaders who've written things themselves. We have, hey baby is not a compliment. You aren't giving me a compliment, you are giving me the creep. So I really like how this is, really accessible and just honest. And these are, again, examples of different sidewalks that can be chalked. But this was at another anti-street harassment rally. We have more examples. She's someone's, mother, which is slashed through, sister, which is slashed through, and then she's someone, which really speaks to the honoring of just someone's humanity, right? That they don't need to be owned by anyone, but that they're human, and which is why they are able to have control over their body and not be harassed. And then here's another example. I want one day where I can walk to class, to the store, or just out my door and feel safe in the city that I call home, which I felt was really powerful and also relevant to the work that Safe Route does. Stop violence against women now. I believe this was a photo that was taken at the rally, not necessarily of a peer leader of ours. And then this is a group of peer leaders at the anti-street harassment rally. And so just our takeaways to this is really, again, encouraging being an upstander versus a bystander. I really like that if you're a bystander, that you're intervening, right, that it's action-oriented. And there are a variety of ways to do that. That we're engaging our school community. So this work may look different, and also recognizing that the work may look different depending on identities of students, and that we're able to be intersectional in this work and recognize that, who's most at risk in these situations, and what ways can we honor that in doing this work. And then lastly, utilizing resources already in place. I think a lot of times we'll feel like we need to recreate the wheel, and really in what ways can we just tune into what's already happening. So again, kind of partnering that with engaging with the school community.
Thank you, Sydney and Nayla. We're going to pass it over to Sarah now.
Hello, everyone. This is Sarah Zimmerman, Program and Policy Director at the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. And I am so pleased to join this webinar and this excellent line of speakers today to talk about the really important and timely topic of street harassment, and also talk about how Safe Routes to School programs can address this issue. So as my fellow speakers have mentioned, studies show that street harassment affects many, many women, 80% of women, 90% of women. But I will just kick off by saying that I personally have never met a woman who hasn't experienced street harassment and who hasn't made significant adjustments to where she walks, what she wears, and other aspects of her behavior in order to deal with it. However, even though street harassment starts affecting girls when they are the target age for safe routes to school, and even though street harassment can directly counter and erode the achievements of safe routes to school programs, many programs don't address street harassment at all. So in trying to think about why safe routes to school programs have been kind of slow to act on this and slow to really engage with street harassment, I think there's kind of three pieces that have caused that. So the first piece is the fact that many people running programs just haven't really realized the significance and the importance of the problem. The second, that even if they do realize that street harassment really is a substantial problem, they aren't necessarily connecting it to the work of safe routes to school or thinking about it in that connection. And then the third piece is understanding it's important, seeing the relevance, but not knowing what to actually do. So I'm hoping that over the course of this webinar today, you've really heard a lot about those first two, and we're going to be able to move into some really concrete steps that safe routes to school programs can take to move into action. So why does street harassment matter for safe routes to school programs? As Emily pointed out, street harassment starts really young. 35% of girls and women report that their harassment began when they were 12 or under. And another 31% of those harassed report that it began when they were 13 or 14. So these kids are the older elementary school kids and middle school kids that are the main focus of most safe routes to school programs. Many safe routes to school programs traditionally have operated from an assumption that all kids are experiencing more or less the same barriers to walking and biking, and that those barriers are things like lack of safe sidewalks and bike lanes, maybe overprotective parents, long distances from schools, things like that. And those things do affect a lot of kids. But of course, at the same time, different kids experience different barriers based on their identities and how their identities are perceived. And one example of this that we have talked about quite a bit is how racial profiling of kids of color while walking and biking really functions as a barrier to feeling safe and to wanting to walk and bike at all for those kids. And street harassment is another example. Street harassment of girls and of other youth on the streets not only discourages walking and biking to school and can lead youth to taking to not wanting to walk and bike at all, or to taking routes that may have more traffic or be more unsafe in other ways. But it also means that girls are often starting to avoid walking and biking just at the age when they're becoming more independent in their travel. So in other words, harassment's not just affecting the short-term goals of safe routes to school programs, of that ability of kids to walk and bike safely to school, but it's also affecting the long-term goals of turning these kids who are walking and biking to school into youth and adults who have healthy lifelong travel habits. So what can safe routes to school programs do? The very most basic, kind of most first step that you could possibly take is don't ignore the problem. So stop pretending that street harassment doesn't exist, or stop pretending that it really doesn't affect the kids that you're working with. And one great thing about talking about don't ignore the problem is that it lets me talk a little bit about one of my very favorite children's books that I read when I was a kid and I've read to my children, which is There's No Such Thing as a Dragon. So this book, which I hope everybody is familiar with, involves a 1950s mom who refuses to acknowledge that a dragon has shown up in her house, which has the effect that the dragon grows bigger and bigger, takes over every room of the house, until finally her son forces her to acknowledge that in fact there is a dragon, and it shrinks right back down to being a manageable kitten-sized little dragon. So the lesson of this is that the first step of addressing street harassment for safe routes to school programs is to help your staff, teachers that you're working with, other volunteers, start to acknowledge that there is a dragon, that street harassment does exist. And so this very first step doesn't have to be super involved. It doesn't require you to become an expert about every aspect of street harassment. It means that you're starting to provide basic information to volunteers or others, such as the talking points that we've developed, which you can find on our website. Or you're starting in volunteer trainings or in meetings that you're having, or newsletters you're sending out to your volunteers to include mention of the topic of street harassment, an overview, some discussion, role plays if you're sort of ready for that. So why is the first step preparing adults? Part of this is some of what we've heard previously in the course of this webinar, the fact that many adults consciously or unconsciously blame girls for harassment and figure that girls bring it on themselves by how they dress or act. And then, of course, the fact that even adults who don't believe that, who don't think it's the fault of the kids involved, may find harassment really embarrassing and uncomfortable to witness or to discuss, may prefer to try and just pretend it didn't happen and it doesn't exist. But as we know, when we are ignorant or uncomfortable in talking to our kids, our reactions often reinforce really harmful messages instead of helping provide kids with supportive actions and supportive messages. So there's some essential things that we want adults who are working in safe routes to school programs with kids to know about street harassment. And it includes some of these items as well as a number of additional ones. The fact that street harassment simply is not the fault of the person being harassed. It is the fault of the person doing the harassment and a society that created and supported that person. The fact that street harassment targets girls, it targets kids with disabilities, kids of color, and kids who are perceived as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. That harassment starts young. It's affecting kids who are middle school age, elementary school age, as well as older kids. And that harassment isn't just like a trivial, no big thing. It can have really serious effects on kids' mental health and on their success in school and on many aspects of how they're functioning. So that's kind of the first step, just starting to be aware and have a little bit more fluency and comfort talking to kids about street harassment if it comes up or if the opportunity to talk about it presents itself. But there's next steps that Safe Routes to School programs can and should take as well. So one of these is providing workshops or trainings for students on street harassment basics, things like how it feels to be harassed, why harassment occurs, what you can do if you experience or see harassment, role plays to work through some of those things. Many of the very things that we've been talking about here today. And then in addition, Safe Routes to School programs can take an active role in assessing and monitoring the scope of the problem of harassment that may be occurring in your community. So asking students about their experiences to find out, is your gut feeling about it correct or not correct? Just as we conduct walk audits to sometimes look at the traffic safety dangers of school routes, conducting safety and harassment audits where we're looking at where harassment's occurring and where students feel unsafe generally, and developing a reporting system for harassment that may align with existing Title IX processes that schools are required to have for sexual harassment reporting. And then, of course, there's also the opportunity for much deeper engagement for Safe Routes to School programs. And we heard today already about some of the really wide range of different kinds of student-led actions that can happen. And these are things that Safe Routes to School programs can support, can kick off and initiate or be involved with in a variety of ways. Those can include things like, working with students to make art or posters about street harassment, hosting art shows in public places to inform more people about the issue, having marches with students, having rallies, posting posters that students have made on school routes to kind of take the message to the people in places where problems are happening. And then some of the ideas that Sydney mentioned, that great fashion show that they did, the sidewalk chalking, just other ways of getting the message out and letting students kind of process and express their thoughts and feelings about street harassment. There's also actions that programs can take to make spaces safer by using adults who are going to, take a lead and be actively involved. So we know examples around the country of businesses that have identified as safe spaces of some sort for students in their communities, places where students can come and feel protected and safe if they are experiencing some sort of harassment or bullying on the route to school. Safe Routes to School programs have often supported corner captain programs where adults may be physically on site in kind of problematic areas on a route to school. And these can certainly include street harassment, and those adults can be prepared to intervene and discourage street harassment from occurring in those locations. And then we also just want to recommend to people the idea of partnering with transit agencies. Many transit agencies in this country have been starting to take a more proactive role about addressing the harassment that occurs on public transportation. And they often have, substantial marketing budgets and budgets to put together messaging campaigns and things like that. So the opportunity for students or Safe Routes to School programs to partner with transit agencies and kind of align messages and amplify messages is a really promising way of working on these issues too. So what's our overall goals in this work generally? We want to make sure that students who are harassed have tools to respond in the moment, however feels safe and right to them, and also have tools to help them process the experience so it doesn't stay inside and eat away at them and kind of erode their mental health. We also want to make sure that we give students tools so that they know how to respond when they're bystanders or upstanders, as we've been hearing about. We also want to address harassment before it occurs by giving messages for boys so that they can avoid ever becoming harassers. So the understanding the harm that occurs through harassment and seeing the social disapproval around harassment is kind of informing them before they even start thinking about becoming harassers. And part of why we want to do that is that, as Sydney was mentioning, we know that harassment is toxic for harassers too. So we want to protect boys from becoming people who are harming themselves and others through this kind of behavior. And ultimately, of course, we want to decrease harassment overall and someday end this kind of harassment. So I just want to point you to a variety of resources that we have on this topic at the Safe Routes to School National Partnership, all of which you can find free on our website. We have a longer report that goes into detail about how Safe Routes to School programs can take action to protect kids from street harassment, more whistles and creepy compliments. And then we also have a fact sheet, a separate sheet of talking points, and a variety of blogs and other opportunities like that. So I just want to wrap up by saying that we have really been tremendously encouraged by the actions that we've seen over the past decades and over the past 6 months to a year of so many brave women and others standing up and taking action to make our streets and our workplaces and our world safer for young people. And we really encourage Safe Routes to School programs to join in and to take a stand on these issues too. And with that, I pass it over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to all our speakers today. Let me show my screen, and we have time for some questions, a few questions. I wanted to start with the first one. Maybe I'll direct this to Emily and then ask Sydney and Sarah to also chime in if they have thoughts. But could you talk a little bit about the differences that might be happening in rural versus urban communities, and if harassment, if it might look different, if there are like different strategies that should be thought about?
Yeah, sure. This is Emily. I mean, I think it depends on which rural communities. I think, a lot of what we see the differences are differences in what public space looks like in these different areas. And so, in rural communities, for example, you oftentimes don't have public transportation. You may not have harassment. You may not have sidewalks, for example. Or if you do, they may not be particularly, populated. Oftentimes we hear about harassment in more rural areas happening inside stores, inside fast food restaurants, public bathrooms. We hear about it in parking lots. And to a certain extent, we can hear about it in terms of, lewd gestures and that kinds of things from car to car as well. And that's not an exhaustive list, but that's a little bit of sort of the color and shape of it. I think that there's a myth that harassment only exists or predominantly exists in urban communities, that it's an urban problem. What we've seen is that it exists everywhere, but certainly population density does have an impact on it. And areas that are more population dense are going to see or more harassment than areas that are less population dense, simply by the nature of if 1 out of every 50 people you pass on the street is going to harass you, you'll do that a lot faster in Times Square than you will in the Walmart parking lot. But certainly, harassment happens in all of these locations. The other thing about a rural environment is oftentimes people are a little more likely to know each other. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will or won't harass each other, but it means some of the implications of that can look differently if people are in relationship or in proximity to being in relationship with one another. It can take on a different feel and a different flavor.
Great, thank you. Let's see, next question. Could you talk about harassment at bus stops or on buses and how schools and staff have addressed those areas? And maybe Sydney, if you have any examples, and then Emily and Sarah, if you have examples as well.
Yeah, so I think something that we really talk about is offering education of what it can look. So first of all, in having these conversations with young folks, it's often for us in New York City, it's very similar to the bus stops, is like the train stations and right around the turnstiles. And I think this can look a variety of different ways. What we often talk about are what ways in which folks are able to get safe. And I think when we're working on trying to get to school or get to where our next destination, that can be tough and feeling like we're in a tricky situation. So I think our first priority in speaking to young folks and young people is just talking about in what ways can you be safe in that moment. So whether it's moving further down the street, right? In what ways can we do what we need to do to make ourselves feel comfortable? But I think that, unfortunately, this is something that is very common en route to school. And that's where we talk about the community engagement in terms of what local community members are typically outside around that time. In what ways are the crossing guards supported and trained on how to intervene and how to support the young folks or anyone that's experiencing this? In what ways are the bodega shop owners able to kind of canvass the street and in a way that's not policing, but really that is just engaging with their community? So that's an example of when we really try to again engage with our community and utilize the resources of folks who are around to keep everyone, and especially young folks, safe and able to make it to their destinations and especially to school.
Thank you.
And Michelle, I will just quickly add a couple thoughts in. As I mentioned, working directly with public transit to hear what they are doing, what they think they're doing, and whether there are ways to partner, whether that's taking student statements and amplifying those on advertising spaces on public transit or other approaches. Obviously, one of the techniques that Safe Routes to School programs also often use to address safety concerns for kids is having kids travel in groups, whether those are groups that have an adult with them, that are walking school buses or the like. But kids can also potentially organize to travel together on public transit, which may or may not stop harassment, but it does definitely create a greater feeling of safety for people. And then I'd also just emphasize again the importance of having a sense of what the scope of the problem really is. So whether that's doing surveys, encouraging public transit systems to have reporting systems and do surveys, things the like.
Great, thanks, Sarah. You just answered the next couple questions that I had come in. We probably have time for a couple more questions. I've received quite a few questions about recommendations for trainings or materials and resources that Safe Routes to School programs and Safe Routes to School coordinators could use right away. Anybody have thoughts on what's available that they would recommend?
On trainings, yeah, this is Emily from Hollaback. So we have a bystander intervention training that I mentioned that could be really useful. We also have on our website, you'll see listed a whole curriculum for schools in particular on street harassment that's free and available for use. So I think, and includes an adaptation of our bystander intervention training. We also periodically provide a train the trainer for our bystander intervention training that's free, so that people can go out and do it in their schools and communities. We don't have one scheduled at the moment, but because we just finished one up, but that's another resource.
Wonderful.
And the resources that Emily mentions are definitely some of the ones that we have highlighted and mentioned in our Wolf Whistles report that I had mentioned earlier. I definitely recommend that people take a look at that and see what they can use directly from that. And then I'll also say that there, as I mentioned before, there aren't that many Safe Routes to School programs that have really done a lot here. So I think for us to be able to develop really focused and tailored materials, we need people to start doing this work and reporting back on what works and what are new innovations that they come up with. So we can develop those materials, but we need to partner with all of you. So hope to see that happening.
This is Sydney. Something else I would add, I was actually going to plug Hollaback. We're an organization that we really respect and appreciate and have referenced before. Another one is Safe Bay, which is a little bit more related to sexual assault and dating violence, but I think it's really accessible to young folks, and it really tackles the upstander and intervention piece as well in a way that centers safety and also young folks' voices. So it's really very helpful for folks at college age and also even in middle school and high school.
Great, thank you. I think this is probably the end of our Q&A. We've got 1 minute left, so I want to thank our speakers again and for everybody for participating. And just to let you know that we'll have the webinar recording posted within the next couple of days, so keep up to date on our website and look for that. We'll also be sending out an email with a very quick survey, and we'd love to hear your feedback on today's webinar. And in that email, we'll have a registration for our next webinar in May, where we'll be talking about Bike Month and bicycle breakthroughs. So thank you again, everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.